Mom, you came. In the bride's waiting room where Risa, my granddaughter who I raised almost as my own child, was getting ready. My daughter Emily greeted me with a cold tone. I pretended not to notice and said, "It's been a while, Emily," with a smile. "Thanks for all the work, housekeeper, but I don't need you anymore, so stop contacting me." Emily, how could you? There are celebrities attending the ceremony. Mom, your presence is really inconvenient. If you care about Risa, just leave for her sake. Her twisted smile revealed her true intentions. I was dressed in the gown I had carefully prepared for this day, ready to celebrate my granddaughter's special moment from the bottom of my heart. Yet, the scene before me was nothing like I had imagined. After a moment of deep thought, I decided to quietly leave, not wanting to cause trouble for Risa. In a small, tearful voice, "I'm so sorry," Risa said. She had done nothing wrong, and yet, why did she have to feel this way? My heart was caught between my deep love for her and the overwhelming sadness of the situation. A wedding should mark a joyful new chapter for Risa, but it felt as though her happiness had been stolen away. Even as I wished for Risa's happiness, Emily's words kept echoing in my mind. Her declaration that I was no longer needed. The world my daughter built by denying my existence, the very daughter I had poured my love into. As I exited the venue, the sky was a flawless, cloudless blue. I couldn't see Risa in her wedding dress, but I was genuinely relieved that such a beautiful day had been chosen for her ceremony. I started the car engine and left the venue. About 30 minutes later, I found myself sighing at a nearby cafe. I took a sip of coffee I didn't really want. I had forgotten to ask for milk and sugar. "It's bitter." Pulling my phone out of my bag, I saw 79 missed calls from Emily. Though surprised, I placed the phone face down on the table, remembering her earlier words not to contact her. "My name is Roseanne. I divorced my husband after realizing our values no longer aligned, without hesitation choosing the path of a single mother. Being an executive in a pharmaceutical company with a high income likely gave me the confidence to make that decision. Taking Emily, my newly teenage daughter, I left home. I felt guilty for dragging her along due to my selfish decision, but I couldn't bear to continue living with her father. "Please make up with Dad. It's so painful to lose our family." Emily always spoke her mind with clarity. She was a strikingly beautiful, strong-willed girl. Our standard of living undeniably declined after the divorce. She probably found this frustrating. Still, compared to the average single-parent household, I believed we lived in relative comfort and affluence. Yet, that affluence did nothing to quell the unease buried deep within my heart. What if something happened to me? Who would protect her? As Emily grew older, this fear tightened its grip on my heart. That's why I avoided indulgences and saved most of my salary for Emily's future and for myself in case of any unforeseen events. I kept extreme frugality, teaching Emily to follow the same path. It seemed like she understood my intentions, but she probably felt trapped in a life of poverty because of me, her single mother. As she started high school, conversations between us became sparse and awkward. When I came home from work, Emily would always retreat to her room. Music played faintly from behind the door, and I hesitated to knock. Why am I so nervous about talking to my own daughter? After a few hesitant knocks, "Emily, how's schoolwork?" I called out. Quietly opening the door, I found her at her desk. She glanced back at me with a startled look, then her expression turned blank again. "It's fine," she said briefly before turning her back to me. Watching her back, I felt at a loss for words. A deep loneliness and helplessness settled in my heart. This wasn't how things should be. I felt I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. I had no idea what was going on in her mind. Years later, she graduated high school and declared she wanted to move out. I had assumed she planned to go to college, so her words caught me completely off guard. Move out? Does that mean you're skipping college and getting a job? I was scouted. They want me to be a magazine model. Emily had been approached by an agency during a trip to Boston with her friends a few months ago. Unbeknownst to me, she had been skipping school, attending auditions, and taking lessons arranged by the agency. A model. Why didn't you tell me? Is this really safe? Mom, do you even watch TV? I'm too busy to watch TV. But what does that have to do with anything? I've been appearing on an evening variety show. I'm known as a high school model, and it's pretty big news at school. You didn't even know that, did you? Back in her room, Emily handed me a youth magazine. I took it and felt a shock course through me. On the cover, wearing makeup and looking glamorous, was Emily herself. As I looked up from the magazine, Emily stared at me with a face that looked ready to burst into tears. I'm going to become a celebrity and make a lot of money. I'll get everything I've ever wanted. Emily. Wait a second. I'm tired of living in poverty. I'll take control of my own life. I'll build a family and make it happy, filled with wealth and security. Emily was moving toward a world so far removed from the one I knew, and I couldn't stop her. Modeling, celebrity life. It was an unknown realm that frightened me to send my precious daughter into. Or maybe, deep down, we shared the same values. I just couldn't understand her way of expressing them. Ultimately, I vehemently opposed her career choice, but Emily had anticipated my reaction. One day, without a word, she left home. An 18-year-old girl couldn't possibly survive on her own. At least, that's what I naively believed. For several years, Emily didn't come home. I heard rumors that she signed with a talent agency I didn't know, but I didn't have any details. My work seemed to get busier as I grew older, and inversely, the distance between Emily and me seemed to grow wider. I had no idea what kind of life she was living. Emily, where are you now? Are you doing okay? Are you eating properly? I muttered to myself in an empty house. I couldn't help but feel like I had become a cold and unfeeling person, having gotten used to the loneliness. Then one day, 2 years later, Emily came home holding a baby in her arms. She wore oversized sunglasses, as if trying to hide the fact that she was a celebrity, though they only seemed to draw more attention. In contrast to my shock, Emily stood silently at the doorway, staring at me. You, that baby. When did this happen? I was surprised she had come home after years without contact, but even more so by the baby. I hadn't known she was pregnant, had given birth, or even had a partner. Emily pushed the baby into my arms forcefully. Feeling the soft warmth of the sleeping baby in my arms, I couldn't help but smile. Her name is Risa. When did you get married? Sorry, I'm really busy. I'll check in occasionally, so please take care of her. What? Wait, hold on. I called out to Emily as she turned her back to leave. She walked briskly, almost as if she was running away from her own child. As I was about to follow her, Risa, who had been quietly breathing, started crying, and I froze in place. The bag Emily had handed me along with Risa contained a bottle and formula. I quickly boiled water and made some milk for her, and Risa drank it eagerly. You must have been so hungry. After she finished drinking, I laid Risa down on the bed, and she soon fell asleep, breathing softly. It had been so long since I had taken care of a baby. Even after just a few hours, I felt completely exhausted. I picked up my phone and called Emily. Why had this happened? What was going on? I was upset, having been left with a baby without any explanation. It was hard to get in touch with Emily. After several days and countless calls, I finally reached her. Her words were cold and brief. I get divorced. I'm focusing on my career, so I can't come back often. I was stunned by her response. In the end, I was the one left to take care of Risa. It broke my heart to see my own daughter abandon her responsibility as a mother. Later, Emily participated in a talent show and made a breakthrough in her career. Even though I rarely watched TV, I heard about her success. I felt it wasn't right to brag at work about my daughter being a celebrity, so I didn't tell anyone. But one day, I overheard young coworkers gossiping. "Do you know Emily, the model? She's so gorgeous." It made me feel oddly proud, almost embarrassed, as if they were talking about me. Eventually, watching Emily on TV became something I looked forward to. As Risa grew older and began to understand more, one day, she pointed at Emily on the screen and said, "Mom." When I explained, "Grandma, that's Mom." "That's right. Risa's mom is always working hard on TV. Grandma is my mom." "No, I'm your grandma. The woman on TV is your mom, Risa's mom." I kept explaining to Risa who her mom was in her world. Her first roll over, her first crawl, and her first words were all moments I had to myself. I took countless pictures and sent them to Emily, hoping she could share in Risa's growth despite her busy life. I genuinely wanted Risa's presence to be a source of comfort for her during her hectic days. Emily, once a household name and beloved celebrity, couldn't maintain her fame forever. Her popularity waned, and she began to disappear from television. Eventually, she started asking me for money to make ends meet. The only times Emily would call were to ask for financial help, and every time, I would end up sending her money. "I need more money again. Emily, you really need to get a steady job and start building a stable life with Risa. I'm a celebrity. My job is to inspire people, to give them hope and dreams. I have to maintain a certain image." I understood how foolish I was as I stood at the ATM, pressing buttons to send her money. The larger the amounts I transferred, the more I felt a sense of shame. I couldn't stop myself, likely because of a deep-seated guilt that I couldn't provide Emily with a better life when I had the chance. I convinced myself that as long as Emily was satisfied, she could keep striving in the entertainment industry. As Risa grew, she became utterly adorable. I finally understood what people meant when they said grandchildren were precious. I showered Risa with love and worked hard to nurture and educate her. Risa excelled in school, and I felt my efforts were paying off. "Grandma, I've been thinking about becoming a doctor." "That's wonderful. You'll need to study harder than anyone else." "Of course, I'll work harder than ever. But Risa asked me to help with her medical school tuition. From the brochures and information sessions she showed me, it was clear this wasn't an expense to take lightly. But for Risa, all right." I smiled and said, "Having worked for a pharmaceutical company, I might have influenced her career interests." Risa found her passion in medicine and entered medical school. Though I warned her about the challenges of being a doctor, she convinced me with her determination. If she was willing to put in the effort, I would support her wholeheartedly. Risa made it through medical school and became a doctor through sheer effort. As someone familiar with the demands of the medical field, I deeply respected her. One day, she confessed she wanted to marry someone. My heart swelled with emotion. Oh, I see. She's already at that stage of her life. Her fiancé was a young surgeon working at the same hospital. I genuinely wished for her happiness. Hoping for a perfect wedding, I began preparing a dress for the occasion. Meanwhile, Emily had made a comeback as a single mother celebrity. She shared her life on TV, her struggles and experiences resonating with women in similar situations, regaining her popularity. I couldn't be happier for her success. With my granddaughter getting married and Emily thriving in her career, everything seemed to be going well. The wedding preparations were almost entirely done by Risa and her fiancé, and I was very much looking forward to seeing how it would turn out. Even the venue was a surprise. Our taxi simply brought us here, and upon arrival, I was amazed by the grandeur of the place. It was a large, elegant wedding hall with an air of prestige. I straightened my posture slightly as I stepped into the venue and made my way to the bride's room to greet Risa. That's where I came face to face with Emily after a long time. "Emily, I'm glad to see you made it to Risa's wedding." Inwardly, I felt a great sense of relief. Emily had left most of Risa's upbringing to me and rarely participated in her school activities. At events like open house days or sports meets, I might have embarrassed Risa, being much older than the other moms. Yet Risa was always kind to me and would smile gently. "Thank you, Grandma," saying, for my beloved granddaughter's wedding, I absolutely wanted her mother, Emily, to attend. If she hadn't shown up, I was prepared to call her, so seeing her there lifted a weight off my shoulders. What emotions would this reunion bring? How much had our relationship changed after all these years? Our eyes met, and Emily smiled, but behind that smile, I sensed the warmth that once existed had vanished. "Mom, so you're here?" Pretending not to notice the chilly tone. "It's been a while, Emily." I smiled back and said. In the next moment, Emily's expression changed abruptly, and she gave me a cold stare. She stepped closer and whispered in my ear, "Thanks for all the work, housekeeper, but I don't need you anymore, so stop contacting me." Her words were as cold as ice, piercing through me. "Emily, do you know how much I've worried about you?" "Worried? Don't make me laugh. I'm a successful celebrity now. I don't need your help. This isn't about being a celebrity or needing help. It's Risa's wedding. Can't we just get along for today? There are industry people attending this ceremony. Honestly, having you here is incredibly inconvenient. For Risa's sake, please just leave." Perhaps even Emily realized how cruel her words were. Her mouth curved into a twisted smile. I was deeply hurt. I had loved her in my own way, but now she had become someone who rejected me entirely. Her words cutting deeply into my heart. Had her life in the entertainment world created an unbridgeable chasm between us? "Grandma, Risa, stay out of this." Risa, looking saddened as she approached me, was sternly stopped by Emily's harsh tone. Risa must have understood how risky it would be to upset Emily just before the wedding. "I only want Risa to be happy." Holding back tears, I managed to say, but Emily ignored my words and walked out of the room. I had dressed up for this day, ready to celebrate my granddaughter's special moment with all my heart. But what awaited me was a scene far removed from what I had imagined. Emily had reportedly been lying on TV and social media, portraying herself as a struggling single mother who raised her daughter alone. She erased my existence entirely to gain public sympathy. Was my presence such an inconvenience to Emily? Risa, with tears in her eyes, remained silent, unable to defy the command to stay quiet. After contemplating for a while, I decided to quietly leave, not wanting to worsen Risa's position. "Risa," with a faint voice, "I'm sorry." She apologized tearfully. She had done nothing wrong, so why was she burdened with this pain? Conflicting feelings of love for my granddaughter and sadness overwhelmed my heart. A wedding is supposed to mark a new beginning for Risa, yet it felt as if her happiness was being taken away. While wishing for Risa's happiness, I couldn't shake Emily's words from my mind. The idea of my existence being deemed unnecessary. The world my daughter built seemed to thrive on rejecting the love I had poured into her. As I exited the wedding venue, the sky was a flawless, vibrant blue. Although I couldn't see Risa in her wedding dress directly, I was truly glad she could have her ceremony on such a beautiful day. I started the car's engine and left the venue. 30 minutes later, I found myself sighing at a nearby cafe. There had been a truck accident on the road ahead, causing a massive traffic jam, with cars lined up endlessly. With no signs of traffic control beginning, I decided to settle into the cafe conveniently located near the venue. I took a sip of coffee I didn't particularly want. I had forgotten to ask for milk and sugar. It's bitter. I pulled out my mobile phone from my bag to find 79 missed calls from Emily. Startled by the sheer number, I silently turned the screen face down on the table. I had a vague understanding of why she was calling so persistently. The truth was, Risa's husband-to-be, Polly, had a father who was a hospital director. Polly's father and I shared a deep professional connection. As a clinical trial director, I had a long-standing association with the head of a general hospital. We had often talked about Risu and his son's upcoming wedding during work, and he had been looking forward to meeting me today. The hospital might have even prepared some special event for today's ceremony as a gesture of goodwill. My absence might have caused some level of confusion at the venue. Although Emily's reason for calling wasn't entirely clear, her words echoed in my mind. The cold command not to contact her reverberated as though trapped in my ears. Emily's repeated calls were likely just a desperate attempt to mitigate the chaos caused by my absence. Inside the cafe, the sound of a tall, neatly dressed barista grinding coffee beans was soothing. The aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air. Taking in the comforting scent, I leaned back deeply into my chair. As I glanced at the television absent-mindedly, the next moment I saw Emily on the screen. Breaking news about popular celebrity Emily continues, the announcer reported. My heart jumped in shock. Accusations of fraud have surfaced, claiming she scammed fans into buying overpriced beauty products through social media. The words on the screen froze my heart. How could this have happened? I checked my phone again and noticed missed calls from Risa as well. Without hesitation, I stood up and rushed to the parking lot. I started the engine and turned on the radio. Thinking about how cornered Risa must feel right now, I couldn't find the words. On the way back to the venue, news about Emily started playing on the radio. Reports about evidence of Emily scamming her fans surfaced, along with clips of her past interviews. They highlighted contradictions in her statements. Her fraudulent actions were being exposed one by one. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, speechless. The image of Emily innocently sharing her dreams was now completely shattered. While I worried about her, memories of her past actions flashed through my mind, and a wave of sadness hit me. Tears began to stream down my face uncontrollably. The bright future Emily was reaching for was now on the brink of collapse. When I arrived at the venue, Emily rushed toward me, looking panicked. Before I could even turn off the engine, she was banging on the window and shouting something. "What were you doing? I've been calling you over and over. Why didn't you get here sooner? What do you mean? You're the one who told me to leave. Just explain everything to them. They're misunderstanding things. I worked so hard to raise Risal on my own, right? A few people who looked like TV reporters approached, with cameras pointed straight at my face. It seemed Emily's lie about raising her daughter alone was on the verge of being exposed. My feelings were in turmoil. Would helping Emily here truly be for her benefit? I kept asking myself this question over and over. I didn't want to witness Emily's life falling apart in front of me. But denying the time I spent with Risa felt equally unbearable. I thought of the day Risa first stood on her own 2 feet. The way she clung to my leg with unsteady steps. How she looked up at me with her innocent face, "Mom," and said. I couldn't bring myself to speak right away. "I'm your grandmother." The words were stuck in my throat. I spent more time with Risa than anyone else, and I felt I had been more of a mom to her than her actual mother. But worrying about that now would only complicate things and hurt Risa even more. Suppressing my feelings, I decided to say the words Emily wanted me to say in front of the cameras. The venue, once vibrant, was now filled with tension. The guests were murmuring as I searched for Risa. I spotted her talking to Polly's relatives, looking sorrowful. "Risa," I called out softly, ignoring the cameras and Emily as I walked toward her. She didn't notice my voice and kept her head down. From the way Polly was asking about Emily, I could sense how much Risa was struggling. That's when I noticed her eyes glistening with tears. She looked as if she were about to break down. When a guest questioned her, Risa suddenly lifted her head as if making a decision. "I'm sorry, I have to tell the truth." Her voice trembled. In that moment, all eyes turned toward her. Even Polly looked at her with a shocked expression. "I said I lived with Mom, but it was all a lie. The truth is, my grandma raised me." Tears streaming down her face, Risa continued. "Mom kept telling everyone she struggled as a celebrity, but it was my grandma who raised me. I barely saw Mom more than a few times a year." Her words sent a ripple of shock through the venue. Polly's relatives wore expressions of shock, and confusion spread across the room. Emily had become a single mother celebrity recognized by almost everyone in the country. Her public image was built around a heartwarming story of overcoming hardships to raise her daughter. But the truth revealed by Risa was unraveling it all, putting Emily in an incredibly precarious situation. My heart raced. Risa's revelation was exposing Emily's lies to everyone. I didn't want Emily's life to crumble, nor did I wish for Risa's suffering. "Risa, that's not true. Emily may have been too busy to see you often, but she loved you deeply. You mustn't forget that." "Risa, I was a single mother and struggled financially. I worked so hard just to pay for your tuition." But Risa ignored our words and continued. "I know how much Grandma sacrificed for me. Getting into medical school is expensive, but she saved every penny, even on the smallest things, every single day. I have money too. I'm a celebrity, for heaven's sake. I even contributed to the wedding gifts. I don't want money earned by pushing overpriced beauty products on my friends or from running a fake online salon." At that moment, Risa's expression crumbled. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice broke. "The beauty products I sell may be expensive, but they're effective. And I personally oversee the salon. Mom, you once laughed about how cheap the production cost of those beauty products was. You said just putting your face on the salon's website boosted membership, calling it an easy money maker. Risa, stop lying. Why would you say such things and make me look bad? That's not how family behaves. We're not family. I've never felt like you raised me." Risa, usually so reserved, was openly voicing her feelings to Emily. Eventually, she said, "I can't take this anymore," and collapsed to the floor. The room erupted into chaos as I rushed to her side. "Risa, Stay with me." I shook her shoulders and called out desperately, but Risa was unconscious. I felt a crushing weight of her suppressed emotions had finally overwhelmed her. The venue descended into turmoil as everyone struggled to grasp what had just happened. "What does she mean by that?" someone with a camera demanded of Emily. I don't know anything," Emily's frantic voice echoed, but I stayed with the unconscious Risa, leaving the pandemonium behind. In the midst of the confusion, I could envision Emily being cornered by countless people. Risa had been told to keep quiet about me raising her so it wouldn't affect Emily's career. And not even Polly had known. Thinking of how hard Emily had tried to maintain this lie made my heart ache. The wedding, scheduled for that day, was ultimately canceled. News of Emily's fraud dominated TV and online coverage for days, capturing public attention. Her name spread like wildfire, taking on a dark notoriety. Meanwhile, my heart was a swirl of sadness and anger. Could I truly feel proud of her as my daughter? The question haunted my days. The situation escalated further when one of the guests at the wedding posted about the ceremony on social media. Emily's fabricated story about her struggles as a single mother became public, completely shattering her image. It was even revealed that Risa's medical school success was thanks to the educational efforts of her grandmother, me, further cornering Emily. In a desperate attempt to turn things around, Emily posted a new lie on social media. She claimed that while she truly loved her daughter, Risa, her busy life as a working single mother kept her from spending time with her. Instead, her grandmother took over child care, effectively stealing her daughter away from her. Emily posted these sensational words to defame me. However, by then, no one online trusted her anymore. Her excuses, aimed at gaining sympathy, only fueled more anger against her. As the situation worsened and she felt increasingly cornered, Emily decided to hold a press conference. "My mother stole my chance to raise my child." She tearfully shared her story, delivering a performance worthy of an actress. Watching this unfold on TV, I felt a storm of mixed emotions, a painful blend of anger and sorrow. "Stop dragging my name through the mud." Though I screamed this in my heart, all I could do was watch as Emily's words spread to the public. Her actions, far too extreme, provoked anger within me. Determined to set the record straight, I decided to reach out to my former colleagues from the pharmaceutical company for testimony. They readily agreed to help, promising to speak about how devoted I had been in raising my granddaughter. With their support, I could finally counter Emily's lies. Yet, as the media uncovered evidence of Emily's involvement in beauty product scams, her position crumbled even without my defense. As days passed, the situation evolved. My grandmother, Roseanne, was the one who raised me. During an interview with a magazine, Risa stated, her words spread far and wide, completely dismantling Emily's career in the entertainment industry. Sponsors terminated their contracts one after another, leaving her future in shambles. As the reports continued, I felt a mixture of relief and pain. While I wanted to feel proud of Emily as my daughter, I couldn't ignore how her choices had damaged our bond. I spent my days reflecting on the meaning of raising her and wondering what I could do moving forward. Could a flower of reconciliation ever bloom within me? Having lost her credibility, Emily was now burdened with paying penalties to her sponsors. Desperate, she decided to make one last plea to me. "I've learned my lesson. Please help me." Tears streaming down her face, she appeared before me, and my chest tightened with anguish. I wanted to help her, but how? As I stood silently, Emily looked up at me with a fearful expression. It was a look I never wanted to see on my daughter's face. Hey, what if we invite reporters and do a joint interview? We could say I gave you money in exchange for raising Risa. You never contributed anything to the household expenses, did you? Well, that's when Risa had troubles with love. It was me, as her mother figure, who supported her. I was always the one she confided in. There was even a time when Risa felt frustrated because you weren't there for her. Hey, can't you think of something, anything? How can I get the world to recognize me as Risa's mom? My fingertips trembled slightly. Why couldn't she understand? Emily, it's not the world that you need recognition from. It's your daughter, Risa. You should start by apologizing to her. Do you even know what you've done? Well, why did you do something to disgrace me in the first place? I was just trying to make her wedding beautiful. Emily didn't seem to grasp why Risa was angry. She had no idea how much it hurt Risa to have the person who was like a parent to her thrown out of the wedding venue. Emily, put yourself in Risa's shoes for once. She doesn't have a dad, so I wanted to be a celebrity. I thought if I became a star, I could make her life brighter instead of dark and dreary. I couldn't help but avert my gaze from Emily. Her eyes were no longer normal. It was as if something inside her had broken. Even after that, Emily showed no signs of remorse and continued posting her photos on social media. She acted as if nothing had happened, further alienating those around her. Eventually, realizing that her career in the country was over, she decided to flee abroad. Seeking a new life, she chose to run to protect herself. However, reports surfaced that she was arrested at the airport just before leaving the country. She was charged with fraud and ended up behind cold, unyielding bars. Her fate was sealed completely. I was momentarily surprised by the news, but also felt a sense of relief. At last, she was forced to face the consequences of her actions. Yet, I couldn't help but reflect on the impact Emily's actions had on us all. I'm truly sorry. I visited Polly's parents' house and sincerely apologized to him and his family. Polly wasn't angry about the incident, but he explained that he hadn't been able to contact Risa. Since that day, Risa had returned to her parents' home and shut herself in. I stood in front of her door and quietly called out, "Risa, can I come in?" There was no response. After a gentle knock, I entered the room. She was lying face down on the bed, her face hidden. I quietly sat down beside her and placed a hand on her back. "Risa, you are an incredible young woman." Risa remained silent, her face still hidden, as quiet sobs escaped her. She didn't respond to my words, just the faint sound of her tears. "What you've been through will only make you stronger. Once you overcome this pain, happiness will surely follow. Sometimes, I feel like my whole life is ruined because of Mom. Why is it always, always Risa? With a mom like that, how could I ever be happy?" When I held her hand tightly, Risa looked up from her downturned position, startled by my grip. I smiled at her, showing my teeth. "That's not true. You have an amazing future ahead of you. There is hope within you. Please believe in that hope." What would Risa take from my words? Life is full of hardships, but Risa, you're not alone. I'm here for you. I'll always be by your side. I could feel Risa's expression gradually softening as she listened to my words. Risa wiped her tears and showed a faint smile. "Thank you. I feel a little better now." After that, her relationship with Polly, who came to understand that she was not at fault, began to mend. They acknowledged Risa's efforts and the guidance I had provided. Our bond grew stronger again, despite the shadow of Emily's influence. Eventually, Risa and Polly's wedding was rescheduled. Surrounded by the radiance of her smile, and the blessings of those around her. My heart overflowed with gratitude. On the day of the wedding, I saw a glimmer of hope for the future Risa was building with Polly, who stood firmly by her side. As I looked at her innocent smile, I thought to myself, this is it. This is her true smile. Now, she is walking beside someone she loves from the depths of her heart. It's more beautiful than any smile I've ever seen on her face. That day, I helped Risa while gazing at her happy figure. The venue was adorned with colorful flowers, as if celebrating their love. "Grandma, I'm so happy." Risa's words echoed pleasantly in my ears. Her eyes sparkled with hope for the new future ahead. I smiled back and placed my hand on her shoulder. At that moment, I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. "Grandma, thank you for supporting me since I was little. Thank you for raising me all these years." Her words resonated deep within my heart. Recalling the pain we endured due to Emily's mistakes, my chest tightened. But as Risa trusted me and stepped forward, I felt that all the suffering was slowly being healed. Relatives and friends gathered at the venue directed warm gazes toward Risa. She looked beautiful. Dressed in her wedding gown, she was like an angel. As she walked toward Polly, the venue was filled with emotion. Watching that scene, I couldn't hold back my tears. Seeing Risa find happiness filled me with genuine joy. As the couple exchanged their vows, my heart swelled with hope for the future. The wounds caused by Emily's past choices would not disappear. However, I was convinced that we could overcome them and walk a new path. As the ceremony progressed, the voices of blessings from those around them echoed, and Risa and Polly smiled warmly at each other. It was a moment where hope was born despite the lingering sorrow of the past. After the ceremony, as relatives and friends raised their glasses in celebration, I quietly approached Risa. "I'll always be on your side. No matter what, I'll be here for you." Risa held me tightly and shed tears. "I'll support you too, Grandma. We're family after all." Perhaps those words were what I had always longed to hear. They spread through my heart like a balm, easing all the pain. Ahead lies a path full of endless possibilities. The wounds of the past have healed. I believe that flowers of rebirth will bloom beyond this path.
If I had known you were going to be born with developmental disabilities, I wouldn't have had you. You're a burden to our family. My mother, Janet, said these harsh words, and my world went dark. We're leaving now. It's the start of our new life as a family of 3. My father, Ronald, shouted from the car window. They left me in front of my grandparents' empty house, laughing as they drove away. I just stood there, a 10-year-old girl, staring blankly at the departing car, unable to do anything. My name is Helen. I'm 25 years old now. I have parents and a twin brother named Jeffrey, but we've been living apart for over 10 years. This is because of a past like this. When I was little, I lived with my parents and my twin brother, Jeffrey. My father was an ordinary office worker, and my mother was a part-time working housewife. We were a typical, ordinary family, but everything changed when we started elementary school. As school began, Jeffrey's brilliance started to shine through, and it became normal for him to get perfect scores on tests. Jeffrey is amazing. Another perfect score. He's good at studies and sports. He'll surely be someone great in the future. My mother would say with a thin smile, and my father would add, "That's right. Maybe a scholar, a doctor, or a sports star. At least we won't have to worry about money." He would laugh coarsely. Meanwhile, I couldn't concentrate in class because of small sounds like other kids pulling their chairs or clicking their mechanical pencils, and I was constantly reprimanded by the teacher. I had been scolded more often than Jeffrey since we were kids, But my parents, who used to love me, started favoring Jeffrey more and more. All our meals were Jeffrey's favorite dishes, and they would take only him out to eat and play, buying him anything he wanted. I was always left alone. If I had told my teacher or any adult about my parents' treatment, maybe something would have changed, but I didn't. I couldn't. I had always struggled to express my feelings to others. I couldn't speak in an organized way and would end up sounding incoherent. Now that I'm an adult, I can somewhat convey my thoughts, but I still often say things that cause misunderstandings. Sometimes I can't grasp what the other person is trying to say, thinking I've answered properly when my response makes no sense. According to my mother, I was born with a mild developmental disability. Though I have become more capable in some areas as an adult, there are still many things I'm not good at. I must have been a troublesome child for adults back then. But that doesn't mean I should have been neglected or that I wouldn't grow. My parents seemed to think I was a child who understood nothing, always comparing me to the brilliant Jeffrey, mocking and insulting me. Now, I can argue that their behavior wasn't right as parents, but back then, my parents were absolute to me. No matter what they said or did, I couldn't hate them and just put on a fake smile to get by. As time went by, my relationship with Jeffrey, who I used to get along well with, changed. Brilliant Jeffrey didn't try to understand me, and as the years passed, he began to look at me with eyes of curiosity and disdain. "Don't talk to me at school. I'm glad we don't look alike. I'll just pretend we're strangers. You're stupid, so just stay quiet." By the time I realized it, Jeffrey had stopped being kind. He would squint his eyes in disgust and treat me with contempt. Eventually, he began to ignore me completely. Predictably, my parents never scolded Jeffrey for this behavior. My days continued with minimal care from my parents, who stopped paying attention to me entirely. On birthdays and Christmas, my parents would take Jeffrey out to dinner. I never had cake, a feast, or presents. They would tell me to eat discounted deli meals and leave me to look after the house. "You're a distraction. Stay in your room," my father would always command. My birthdays and Christmases were spent alone in my room, listening to the cheerful voices from the distant living room. "You don't need a desk since you can't do anything." It was an obvious statement to them. I was not provided with a desk or any study materials. Everything was for Jeffrey. I lost the motivation to study, and my grades plummeted further. I had no place at school or home, but there were two adults I genuinely loved. My grandparents who lived far away. Although it took over 2 hours by car to visit them and we rarely saw each other, twice a year during summer and Christmas breaks, I was allowed to join the family trips to their house on the condition that I stayed silent in the car. My grandmother's house was a rural, secluded place that bored Jeffrey and my parents, but I loved it. I was fascinated by the colors and scenery of nature. While Jeffrey studied in silence, I would sit beside him and color similar hues on the back of flyers with colored pencils I brought from school. My parents and Jeffrey would look at me with disdain, but my grandparents would say, "That's the color of the sunset," and put my drawings on the refrigerator. I was overjoyed. Not just because they displayed my doodles, but because they understood my feelings without words. My grandparents adored Jeffrey too and never showed favoritism, but they were the only adults who treated us twins equally. I lived each day looking forward to those 2 days a year when I could see my grandparents. When Jeffrey and I turned 10 in early March. Just as spring break began, my parents abruptly announced, "The apartment is sold." "What?" I was bewildered, and Jeffrey laughed through his nose. "You're as dumb as ever. They said they sold it. We're moving." "Moving? We sold the house? Where to? What about school?" When? Why? As I started to panic from the sudden news, my father's angry voice boomed. Quiet. Your questions never make any sense. It's your fault for not noticing we've been preparing for this. Pack your things quickly. Looking around, I saw the living room was already cleared out. Since I spent most of my time confined to my room, I hadn't noticed things gradually disappearing from the house. In a panic, half crying, I packed my belongings into the boxes handed to me. I had no toys, minimal clothing, and only the bare essentials my parents provided. Packing took no time as it was just a matter of putting the things I had brought home from school into a box. I've packed everything. It's all in the boxes now. Is this okay? I have my school bag too. I don't need a report. Just get in the car. Okay. My father grabbed my box and roughly shoved it into the car. I climbed in with my school bag on my lap, but Jeffrey, who usually sat beside me, wasn't there. Jeffrey's not here? Without him, it'll be just the three of us, Dad, Mom, and me. Did we forget something? There's not much stuff. Didn't I tell you not to talk in the car? My mother snapped at me, and I shut my mouth. Your talking is always so nonsensical. We gave Jeffrey some money to go out and have fun. Now be quiet. Silently, I watched the cherry blossoms outside, their petals starting to bloom. Suddenly, a spark of hope lit up in my chest. Maybe, just as they had taken Jeffrey out before, today they were going to take me somewhere fun. Perhaps they were only pretending it was a move to surprise me. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. While I naively daydreamed, my parents were whispering about something, but I didn't pay attention. I was too excited about the possibility of a special day. I never imagined the betrayal that was coming. After a while, I must have fallen asleep, as I was jolted awake by my mother's sharp voice. Wake up! Grab your school bag and get out. Where are we? Groggily, I climbed out of the car and blinked in surprise. We were in front of my grandparents' house. Yay! Grandma, Grandpa. With great enthusiasm, I tried to open the door, but was stunned. It won't open. It's locked. Mom, it's locked. We can't get in. Oh, is it? It's a weekday, so they might be at work. What? Well, I just called them, so they'll be back within an hour. Goodbye. My father dumped my luggage on the porch and got back into the car. A sense of dread filled me, and I clung to my mother's arm in a panic. Wait, where are you going? Mom, Dad, wait. Where? We're going home. We can't leave Jeffrey alone, can we? What? My mother shook off my arm and continued matter-of-factly. Jeffrey got accepted into a prestigious elementary school that goes all the way to university. He's starting there next term, so we sold the condo to help cover the tuition and decided to move for a fresh start. We want to do everything we can for our brilliant son, but with you around, he gets distracted and it costs us more money. The new term is starting, so it's the perfect time for you to live here. Wait! I don't understand. Why? Am I changing schools? Am I transferring? It's things like that that irritate me. My mother's shouting left me speechless. Since you were little, you haven't understood anything and have only been a burden to me. Your grades are bad, your looks are mediocre, and you can't even talk properly. Jeffrey is such a good kid, so why do you only cause us trouble? Am I doing something wrong? I'll apologize. I'm sorry. I don't need your empty apologies. If I had known you had developmental disabilities, I wouldn't have given birth to you. You're just a nuisance to our family. When my mother said that, my world went dark. Let's go! Our new life as a family of 3 starts now. My father shouted out the car window. I need to stop them. Don't go. Don't leave me. Mom, Dad. Am I a bad child? Words swirled in my head, but when I tried to speak, they got stuck and wouldn't come out. My mother glanced at my silent, moving lips, but quickly got into the car. Sorry for the wait. Let's buy Jeffrey a cake from that famous shop around here. With that, my parents drove off, laughing as if nothing had happened, leaving me behind. I stood there, staring blankly at the departing car, unable to do anything. Helen, are you okay? Helen. Grandpa. Through my hazy vision, I saw my grandparents' concerned faces. By the time I noticed, the sky had already darkened. I must have fallen asleep while waiting for my grandparents to come home. Your hands are so cold. Oh dear, your face is so pale. Wrapped in my grandfather's jacket, which smelled like him, I was carried into a warm room. My grandparents moved efficiently, talking angrily. How long had she been waiting? I saw the message when I checked my phone during a break. Please take care of Helen. She's waiting in front of the house. I rushed home, worried sick. Me too. I don't check my phone during my part-time job, and if you had taken your break a bit later, it would have been terrible. At that time, my grandfather was working as a craftsman, and my grandmother had a part-time job at a deli. Despite knowing their schedules, my parents had sent just a message on the day itself and considered it done. That made me realize how little I meant to them. When I sipped the steaming cocoa my grandmother handed me, the warmth made my tears start to flow uncontrollably. My grandmother gently rubbed my back as I sobbed. My grandfather, having stood up, seemed to have called my father. They had a heated argument, and eventually, he slammed the phone down. Helen. I spoke to your father, but he wasn't making any sense. Can you tell me what happened? With gentle smiles, my grandparents listened quietly as I tearfully explained everything that had happened. Despite my story being more disjointed than usual, they didn't interrupt. They said I'm a burden because of my developmental disability. They said they wouldn't have had me if they'd known. Mom and Dad are going to be a family of 3 with Jeffrey. As soon as I said that, I felt warmth envelop me. My grandmother was hugging me. What nonsense. You're a good girl. No matter what anyone says, you're a good girl. I'm so happy you were born. Huh? But a person's worth isn't determined by intelligence or looks. Your grandpa and I are just ordinary old folks who didn't go to prestigious schools, but we've cherished what we're good at and made it this far. You may not be good at studying, but you have a wonderful sense and expression. That's something irreplaceable. It's your talent. Talent. That's right. It's okay now. There are no adults here who will make you sad. You've done well. I'm sorry we didn't realize sooner. Watching my grandfather apologize while patting my head, I felt something welling up inside me, and I burst into tears. My grandparents held me until I calmed down. After that, I started living with my grandparents. I transferred to a small elementary school, where the teacher was very kind and became my first supporter outside my grandparents. The school had few students, so they tailored the curriculum to each one, understanding my nature and adapting the lessons accordingly. As a result, my grades, which had been steadily declining, began to improve and were reflected in my scores. Even my poor communication skills were accepted as part of my personality, and I made friends. Feeling secure both mentally and physically, I found what I wanted to do. 15 years passed. During that time, my parents and Jeffrey never contacted me, and at some point, they changed their address and phone number without my knowledge. As their faces began to fade from my memory, an unexpected day arrived.
Open up! I know you're in there!
The early morning silence was shattered by a loud voice and vigorous knocking on the door. My grandparents were already awake, and I, still groggy, headed to the entrance to see what was happening.
What do you want after abandoning your daughter for over 10 years?
My grandfather's shout fully woke me, and I peeked out to see what was going on, my eyes widening in shock.
Well, you must be Helen, right? You've grown so much.
In my memory, my mother was always neatly dressed, but the woman before me was an overly thin middle-aged woman. The middle-aged man next to her had a protruding belly, looking nothing like the slender father I remembered. Both smiled warmly and reached out to me familiarly. I avoided their hands and glared at them.
If you really are my mom and dad, what are you doing here? Don't be so distant. We came with a proposal. A proposal? We know all about it. This workshop is making quite a profit now, isn't it? Dad's getting old, and he's reaching his limit as both a manager and a craftsman, right? So, I thought I'd come back and take over.
My grandfather snorted at my father's words. I see.
So you've come back to leech off us.
And you think you'll take over?
How audacious! Do you really think we'd hand over our cherished workshop to an amateur who knows nothing about glass art?
Besides, we already have a successor.
What? Helen. She's going to take over. She's a genius, after all.
What? You've got to be kidding. She can't do anything. Before my father could finish, my grandmother threw a newspaper in his face.
What the hell are you doing?
Take a look, you idiot.
There's an article about our workshop in there.
My father opened the newspaper, eyes widening as he glanced between me and the article in astonishment.
A young glass artist from a small workshop to the world.
It was an article from a recent interview. Around the time I entered middle school, I became interested in my grandfather's work and started helping out at the workshop. It didn't take long before I started working on glass art myself, and soon enough, I became my grandfather's top apprentice. Recognized for my skills by my grandfather, I poured my passion into capturing nature's beauty in glass. A few years ago, I finally created my ideal piece, and when I started selling it, it quickly gained attention on social media, propelling me to fame as a glass artist. Now, we receive orders from restaurants and shops overseas, have hired more craftsmen, and started selling online.
That's our daughter. She's nothing like that useless, cowardly son of ours.
My father exaggeratedly praised, while my mother nodded vigorously beside him.
Useless? Cowardly?
Surprised by the adjectives far removed from my memories of Jeffrey, I asked, and my mother glared at me.
Hear me out. That useless kid.
She began excitedly explaining, spitting as she spoke. According to her, Jeffrey had smoothly progressed from university to a prestigious company. However, having been praised as a prodigy for years, Jeffrey became incredibly conceited and fragile. After being crushed by the harsh reality of society, his arrogance shattered, and his pride broken, he quit within a year, unable to handle his first setback.
You'd never think he'd quit over a little scolding, right? Now, he never leaves his room except for the bathroom and bath. We quit our jobs thinking Jeffrey would support us once he got hired.
Hey, Dad, we don't need to be the successors. You have money, right? Just take us in, at least the two of us. My grandfather looked dumbfounded at my father's plea.
Do you only care about yourselves?
But Jeffrey's still young. If we move here, Jeffrey will figure things out on his own. He's not a child. We can't get proper jobs at our age. Come on, Dad, it's a request from your beloved son.
My grandfather was stunned, and my grandmother sighed deeply before returning to the room. My mother's gaze turned towards me as I stood there in a daze.
You want to live with Mom and Dad, right? Just nod and agree, since you don't understand anything,
she said, her eyes bloodshot, and my father nodded in agreement. After thinking for a moment, I replied,
Why should I live with strangers? What? We're your real parents. We raised you, my mother exclaimed. When I was little, living with Mom and Dad, I was just existing. Grandpa and Grandma are the ones who raised me, along with my teachers,
I said, continuing as they stood there, stunned.
You might be my dad and mom, but I don't remember you. I won't live with people I don't know.
I bowed my head. If I was saying something wrong, my grandparents would correct me, but they said nothing, so I knew I was right. Amused, my grandfather smiled as my father turned to him.
Don't you think that's a terrible thing to say? Dad, say something to her. Sure, I'll say something. It's absurd to claim you raised her after abandoning her at 10 years old. No. Not to me, to Helen. Helen, say something to your dad. Grandpa.
Something.
No, that's not what I meant. You told me to say something, so I said something.
My father, his face turning red, scratched his head in frustration while my grandfather chuckled.
Don't abandon us. Dad, please.
My father pleaded, clinging to my grandfather's hand, which he shook off with a stern shout.
Enough already. How can you say such childish things now?
My parents froze at my grandfather's voice, just as my grandmother returned, with a broom in hand. Perfect timing. It's spring cleaning today, she said, starting to sweep the entrance.
Hey! You're getting dust everywhere, my mother complained. Parents who abandon their children aren't needed in the start of this new season,
my grandmother said matter-of-factly, sweeping toward my parents.
Go home now. I'll keep sweeping until you leave. Get ready for it.
Standing beside my grandmother with a broom in hand, my grandfather joined in.
Go home! It's cleaning day! Dad! Mom! Stop it!
My parents cried out.
Please, stop!
My mother shouted. But ignoring their pleas, my grandparents continued sweeping expressionlessly.
Leave now!
My grandfather yelled.
And never come back!
My grandmother added. As they shouted, my parents gripped my hand tightly in desperation.
Are you really going to abandon your parents? We're drowning in debt and struggling to survive. If we're family, shouldn't you help us? My family is Grandpa and Grandma only. Your grip hurts, let go,
I said, forcefully pulling away their wrinkled hands. As my parents collapsed to the floor, I took the broom from my grandmother.
Goodbye forever,
I said, sweeping the broom in front of their faces. That seemed to be the final blow, and my parents slumped in defeat and left in a hurry. Some time later, Jeffrey showed up at our workshop. Our parents, chased by debt collectors, had abandoned Jeffrey and run away in the night. Eventually, Jeffrey was evicted by the debt collectors and, having nowhere to go, was taken in by the police. They contacted the only family he had left, our grandparents.
Those who don't work don't deserve to eat. If you're willing to help out in the workshop, we'll provide you with food and shelter.
What do you say? Grandpa offered. Surprisingly,
Jeffrey agreed without hesitation. While he wasn't very good at helping in the workshop and got scolded by Grandpa and the other workers daily, he soon found his place handling internet sales and accounting. His skills in these areas made him an invaluable member of the team. Grown-up Jeffrey was ashamed of his past behavior and recognized my talent. While calling it reconciliation might be an exaggeration, it felt both heartwarming and a bit embarrassing to have Jeffrey now being kind to me. As Jeffrey began to be acknowledged as a valuable worker by everyone in the workshop, our parents attempted to reach out to him. They were still focused only on their own problems, saying things like,
"Where are you? If you don't help, we'll be forced to work on fishing boats. Please save us."
Fed up with their self-centered pleas that didn't even mention Jeffrey, he changed his phone number and email address to cut off all contact. I wonder if they're desperately working on a fishing boat somewhere now. In the end, Jeffrey and I managed to escape from those parents, and for that, I'm truly grateful. Our meals with Grandpa, Grandma, Jeffrey, and me around the table are simple but warm. The bowls holding the beef stew are a bit misshapen, but they are Jeffrey's creations. Grandpa drinks his beer happily from a glass I made. I'm now savoring the happiness I couldn't experience in my childhood.
Go get your welfare from TANF, you poor thing.
With those words, the two of them left the house. I felt drained and just sat down right there. I remembered what my husband Mike had said earlier.
You are definitely independent, but I've always felt like my pride as a man was being hurt. I want to build a future with your sister Nancy now. So, I want a divorce.
It all seemed meaningless, and I signed the divorce papers to express my intention to divorce. Sometime later, I had a meeting with both of them, with a lawyer present, to discuss the compensation I demanded. Shamelessly, my sister Nancy, who was not involved, demanded a share of the assets. But then, the lawyer burst out laughing.
"Isn't TANF for you?"
he said.
"What?"
Taken aback by the sudden turn of events, she was also surprised and exclaimed. Immediately after, seeing the documents the lawyer had placed on the table, Nancy turned pale. "My name is Sally. Mike and I have been married for 18 years. I am 45 years old, and he is 3 years younger, at 42. We have one daughter, Lisa, who is currently 17 years old and in the 10th grade. She is approaching an important period with her exams next year. We met through work. I worked at a real estate company, and Mike worked at a related company. We hit it off over something minor and started going out in our private time. He is very sensitive and often struggles to make decisions. Back then, I found his indecisiveness cute and was attracted to him. I wanted to take care of him, purely out of affection. That was also because I have a much younger brother. At first, I saw him as a brother and took care of him, but gradually, I was drawn to his more masculine aspects. That led to serious dating and eventually marriage. Mike was always indecisive, but he was the one who confessed and proposed to me. In those moments that required a decision, he always stepped up. That's why I felt I could marry him and be okay. And we did, going on to have Lisa and never experiencing a serious fight or a crisis of divorce. Once Lisa grew up, I thought we would start our second life as a couple. That's what I had believed.
"Sally, can I just stay here for a bit?"
My sister Nancy said this as she showed up unannounced with a huge suitcase. I have a brother and a sister. The woman standing in front of me was my sister, Nancy. Perhaps because of the age difference, I got along well with my brother. But I've always had a difficult relationship with her, who is a year older. Being shorter than Nancy, I always ended up with her hand-me-downs. Feeling sorry for me, when my parents bought me a new toy.
"I want one too. Give me yours."
Nancy would say, taking the new doll I received and giving me her old, worn-out doll in return. Her bullying didn't stop there. Taking things was the lesser evil. Once we were in elementary school, she took all my friends, and when I got my first boyfriend in high school, she seduced him away from me. I hated her so much that I chose a different college just to avoid her, but she still interfered, ruining what should have been a fun college life. I still hate her to this day. I'd prefer not to have anything to do with her. So, I studied hard, got my real estate certification, and lived a life where I wouldn't have to see Nancy. Mike and I decided to have a small wedding, just the two of us, a photo wedding. My parents knew Nancy's character, so they kept my marriage a secret, yet here she was. I had hoped that once Lisa went to college, Mike and I would finally have some time for ourselves.
Sally, you live in such a nice house. Is it a single-family home? Did you buy it? Oh, there's a room available here. I'll use this one.
Nancy's irritating voice brought me back to reality.
Hey, this is a problem. What do you mean by showing up unannounced? My husband and daughter live here too. You can't just move in.
Ignoring my words, she began to inspect the house. Today was a holiday, but Lisa was out for a course. And Mike had been out since the morning for work.
Could you please leave before they come back?
I pleaded multiple times, but she wouldn't listen. And finally, in the evening, the two of them came home.
Who is this?
To Mike, who looked puzzled, Nancy greeted him with a charm that belied her 46 years.
Nice to meet you, I'm Nancy. Sally's sister. When did you get married without telling me? I had no idea because there was no greeting or report. I was just bored and went to visit our childhood home and found your wedding photo in Mom's room by accident. It's terrible, isn't it? Even though we're sisters.
Mike knew I had a sister. So, perhaps realizing she was exactly as he had heard, he looked a bit troubled. But I didn't miss it. Mike, looking enchanted by the beautiful Nancy. And Lisa, too, had a confused look on her face when she came home. No wonder. An aunt she had never met suddenly showed up at our house. But she pushed forward with the idea of moving in.
Actually, I was fired from my job, and it's been hard to come up with rent and living expenses, so I was wondering if I could stay for a little while. Maybe it's okay for a little bit? Eh? But no!
Lisa is facing an important time with her exams next year. I tried to say this, but the two of them didn't listen to my words and got excited on their own.
Actually, I had heard about you from Sally.
Oh, that's fine.
You were probably just going along with Sally avoiding me, right?
Sorry for being such a sister. From here, a tumultuous daily life begins. Nancy doesn't do any housework but keeps asking for money, and eventually starts taking cash from my wallet. This happened within just 1 week of she moving in to live with us. I've warned her about this several times, but she wouldn't listen.
Hey, if you want money, at least tell me what you're buying or why you need it. Don't just take it from my wallet. Why do I have to report to you what I'm buying? Because it's my money.
I wish she would start job hunting and move out soon since she was fired. But it doesn't seem like she's looking for a job, and lately, Mike and Nancy seem to have the same times of absence. Mike said he was working overtime, but there was never any overtime pay included in his salary. When I complained about it,
the salary isn't supposed to include overtime, is it? You have to get paid for the overtime separately. If you can't say it, shall I say it for you? Huh? Are you doubting me? The overtime is paid separately, so there's no problem.
Mike, who was usually gentle and rarely raised his voice, shouted. This was a shock in itself. because he was not someone who would argue emotionally or suddenly start yelling. From this point on, I started to feel a crisis in our current life. As usual, Nancy only lazed around at home, costing more money than what we spend on our daughter Lisa, which only made me sigh. I consulted my parents about this. They apologized for their lack of oversight, which led Nancy to find out about my marriage and our current home. But the fault wasn't with my parents. I had moved away from my dear parents to live quietly with Mike and Lisa, yet Nancy clung to me, even going so far as to find out where we lived. She must have been preparing to find out where we lived the moment she found the wedding photo of Mike and me. Surely, she must be planning to take something from me again and make me unhappy. I've even started to doubt whether she was really fired from her job. Maybe she quit her job on purpose to freeload off me and ruin my life. That's what it's starting to feel like. If that's the case, I need to kick her out of the house as soon as possible.
You say you were fired, but can't you get unemployment benefits?
Well, I've always been part-time, so I'm really struggling.
I could have gone back to my parents, but I can't expect my elderly parents to take care of me, right?
So, as the independent Sally, it's your responsibility as a sister.
That's just common sense.
Faced with such nonsensical remarks, I was at a loss for words. Nancy, after dropping out of college, has been working part-time ever since and has never worked as a full-time employee. After being confronted with the fact, I realized job hunting wasn't going well for a reason. 3 months after Nancy started freeloading, I finally caught them cheating. I had been suspicious for a while, but seeing it was true was another thing. One day, when a client meeting was canceled and I was killing time at a cafe, I saw Nancy and Mike walking together outside. They were holding hands and chatting happily. A brother and his sister-in-law holding hands like that just isn't something that happens. In that moment, I was sure they were cheating. Sometime later, once my feelings had settled, I confronted them at home.
So, the overtime was a lie, huh? Nancy, you've just been pretending to job hunt while hanging out with Mike. The worst. Even at this age, you can't be satisfied without taking something from me? That's why I kept my marriage to Mike a secret.
When I let my emotions burst and poured out my feelings, they easily admitted to the affair. Then they started saying things that were even more infuriating.
If I had known such a beautiful woman was my sister-in-law, I wouldn't have believed Sally and avoided you. You're definitely independent, but I've always felt like my pride as a man was being hurt. I want to build a future with Nancy now. So, let's get a divorce.
He shoved divorce papers already filled out in his part at me.
Fine.
At this point, reconciliation is absolutely impossible.
Nancy, Mike, from now on, I won't be taking care of you financially, so just be prepared for that.
I declared, and Nancy burst into laughter, saying something outrageous.
Go get your welfare from TNF, you poor thing. What?
What are they even talking about? As I was wondering, a smirking Mike started saying something even more appalling.
Yeah, that's right. Since custody usually favors the mother, right? I think it's better for Sally, as the mother, to be with our daughter. The rest is up to you.
With those words, the two of them left the house. Some 10 minutes later, Lisa came home and was puzzled by the quietness of the house. So, I honestly told her that we were getting a divorce. Lisa was shocked at first, but seemed to accept the situation somewhat relieved after a while. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. I decided to have a discussion with both of them, accompanied by a lawyer I hired to claim compensation. Shamelessly, Nancy demanded a division of assets. But then, the lawyer burst out laughing.
Isn't TANF for you?
He said.
What?
Taken aback by the sudden turn of events, Nancy was also surprised and exclaimed. Immediately after, Nancy turned pale when she saw the documents the lawyer had placed on the table.
"There's no money for a division of assets with this couple,"
the lawyer said, looking shocked between Mike and me. Of course, Mike was also surprised, being told there was hardly any assets left. Anticipating this, I had taken action as soon as I caught Mike and Nancy cheating. Therefore, the cash we had between us was only $10,000. For a couple that had been married for 18 years, that amount is unbelievably low.
"Hey, what's this about? We had lots of savings, didn't we?"
Mike, completely clueless about what was happening, asked in panic. Seeing him like that, anger welled up in me. "You really have no interest in Lisa, do you?"
"I told you, didn't I? The savings I've accumulated so far were for education, and I was thinking of transferring them to her account. You said, do whatever you want. So, I transferred all my savings to her account. Almost all my savings were for education. You should know that better than anyone. She's managing her money herself, and even paid gift tax, so it's no longer our savings,"
I said with a cold expression, and Mike's face turned pale as he remembered the conversation.
"So, what's the breakdown of the $10,000? I think about 80% of it is your secret stash."
When I said that, Mike looked at me with a face that seemed to ask how I knew.
"So, you knew about it, that's why you transferred your savings to Lisa, anticipating the division of assets?"
"You agreed to it. Look, you even signed the consent form yourself." Mike then became angry.
"I thought it was strange. Why would you ask for my agreement just for that?"
Mike said, ruffling his head, clearly regretting his decision, but since he had signed it himself, there was no turning back now. Even after consulting with a lawyer, it was explained that since Mike had agreed and made the gift to Lisa, the money was no longer considered marital savings. I didn't want such people to get the money I had been saving for Lisa. That's when I thought of making a living donation. Hearing this, Nancy looked stunned but managed to say to Mike,
"Hey, you said we had plenty of savings. Weren't we supposed to live a luxurious life? Dividing $10,000 isn't going to amount to much. Why didn't you realize her intentions sooner?"
She blamed Mike, but he just looked away and remained silent. He had a small salary and was burdened with a substantial amount of student loans, so for a while after getting married, he hardly contributed to the living expenses. But that was agreed upon. When Mike said it was difficult for him to contribute to the living expenses, I said,
"Understood. I'll take care of all the living expenses. So could you focus on saving as much as possible for our future?"
So, for over a decade since I took over all the living expenses, I thought Mike had been able to save at least $100,000 or more, but in reality, it was only about $10,000. I had thought saving would be easy since he didn't have to pay for living expenses, but he was splurging behind my back. I found out the savings amount when I saw Mike's banking app and felt betrayed, though I hoped maybe he had saved properly in another account. But that hope was also betrayed, and since I had divorced him, it didn't matter anymore. Nancy, finally understanding the severity of the situation, was in despair, her body trembling slightly. She seemed to be trying hard to think of what to do next, but apparently came up with nothing. Knowing that the cash available for division was only $10,000, I decided to tell Nancy another truth. I turned my gaze towards Mike and said,
"I debated whether to say this, but Mike, aren't you planning to quit your job?"
Suddenly, Mike, who had been avoiding my gaze, looked at me. Mike, visibly rattled, shifted his eyes left and right before exclaiming,
"How do you know I'm planning to quit my job? I had only discussed it with the boss."
"I thought so after seeing the paycheck." What I pointed out was the fact that no overtime was paid, but I was actually puzzled by another item: the paid leave. Mike, who had quit a job in real estate to work for a construction company, had never taken more than 5 days of paid leave. Yet, recently, his pay slips showed that he had used up his paid leave in a lump sum. Taking a bunch of paid leave at once suggests quitting. Since then, I had been suspicious of their affair and thought maybe Mike planned to quit his job after divorcing me, thinking he would get a substantial amount of assets. That he would actually go through with such an overly optimistic plan made me sigh. You were my husband at one point. You should know what kind of work I do and how much wealth I've built up. To rely on that for an affair and to choose to quit is really short-sighted. As I said this, Mike's face turned red. The lawyer's mention of TANF to Nancy meant, in essence, that if both of them were unemployed, that's where they'd end up without jobs. Faced with another fact, Nancy was panicked but soon shouted as if she had realized something. Wait. If you can prepare for Lisa's college tuition and cover living expenses by yourself, there must be something fishy. I got it. You're hiding assets, aren't you? That's it. Come on, confess already. Hearing Nancy's words, Mike also seemed to have a realization. That's right. Nancy, actually, Sally owns a lot of real estate, so we have to divide that as property. That was close, nearly got trapped. Real estate is a significant asset, so we need to split it evenly. You've been acting all high and mighty, but you're using underhanded tactics too. As I watched the two of them laughing, the lawyer finally couldn't help but laugh. The moment became tense. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to speak matter-of-factly. If you're going to talk about property division, you should study more. Mike, as the ex-husband, should know that Sally owns real estate as a business and is making a profit. A corporation and an individual are separate. Her company is her separate property and cannot be divided. Realizing the lawyer was correct, the two of them blushed and froze. The lawyer continued. Typical assets would include cars, houses, cash, and savings. Furthermore, Mike and Nancy have essentially admitted to the affair. So, Sally can claim compensation from you both. We'll claim $10,000 from Mike and $3,000 from Nancy. Their faces contorted at that. Isn't that too much? It was just a few months' affair. Right. Normally, it wouldn't cost $10,000, would it? They started making excuses. But I immediately countered. Oh, who decided that? Market rates are just that, rates. You took paid leave to date Nancy, and Nancy didn't seriously job hunt but played with my money. The lawyer objectively assessed these facts and came up with this amount. What, would you have preferred a higher amount? They quickly shook their heads. The discussion didn't conclude that day and was adjourned. However, I felt a firm sense of progress. 2 weeks later, we set up another meeting. Somehow Nancy had become defiant, saying, "Give me the house and the car. It's part of the property division. I'll give Mike's $10,000 and pay the remaining $1,000, okay?" Her ridiculous claim almost made me yell in anger, but I managed to control myself and calmly assessed the situation. The house still had a mortgage, and I had to maintain it every time something happened. So, it would have some value if sold. Even the car, bought new, is only 5 years old. Both still have value, yet accepting Nancy's argument would only result in my loss. That's the last thing I want. Nancy, did you do the math? If you included the money from selling the house and car, you couldn't possibly say that. Generally, such talks are for those who cheated, like Nancy, not for me to say. How presumptuous can one be? I thought so, but before I could continue, Mike, who was beside Nancy, started saying, Sally has assets worth $160 million at the company, right? I don't know if you're some real estate mogul or what, but being so greedy even with all those assets is just too much. I was taken aback for a moment, but their words and actions were so absurd that I burst into laughter. Given the situation, my sudden laughter made both of them freeze. After a good laugh, I became serious again.
Is that all you wanted to say? And why are you playing the victim? Greedy? I'd rather be greedy than give money to a man who cheats and abandons his daughter and to the worst sister who steals her brother-in-law. It's better for me to secure as much as possible for Lisa.
The two of them flinched. As the lawyer said in our last meeting, if you want to use legal terms, you better study more. What on earth made Nancy think she could say that? I planned to shatter their schemes bit by bit.
Mike, the house is in my name, right? I know that, but we've lived together all this time.
So what?
I took out a mortgage and bought it before we were married.
No matter what you do, it's my property.
The car was bought new, has no accidents or violations. If you want to take it, pay me half the appraisal value. That's the rule for property division.
I own 2 cars. One is the new car we're discussing, and the other is a used compact car. But the latter would hardly be worth anything.
But the lawyer said, no, cars are part of the property division.
Did Nancy just believe that without thinking? That's not what it meant.
Look, the lawyer was only talking about the main things that could be part of the property division, not that they will be in this case. The only things we need to divide between us are the $10,000 combining Mike's secret savings and my savings, and the 2 cars.
That's all. Nancy knew nothing. Of course, Mike hadn't thought it through either, and this oversight put them back in a pinch. He seemed to ponder for a while but eventually became clueless and pleaded with me.
Please, just give us enough money to start a new life.
I beg you. But he didn't seem remorseful. It just seemed like a plea to solve the immediate problem. Such shallow words are worthless to me. I answered with a heart of stone.
It seems like you wouldn't want to pay Lisa's child support anyway, so there's no room for compromise. Why should I worry about your living expenses?
Saying this clearly, the two of them signed the documents, realizing that nothing they said would make me agree. After the divorce and property division were settled, Nancy kept calling me persistently.
Hey! Why did Mike have so much debt? You were paying for the living expenses, right? Then what's the point of the debt? What's going on here?
She was screaming on the other side of the phone. I told her the plain facts while holding back a sigh.
Isn't it obvious by now? The fact that after over a decade, there was only about $1,000 in savings when it came out. Does having debt while having savings mean you took out a card loan for some big purchase or something?
When I asked incredulously, Nancy earnestly explained the situation to the point of drawing back.
Yes. He took out a $1,000 loan just to buy some nonsensical branded goods. And then the credit card payments turned out to be a huge mess because it was set to revolving payments without us knowing. This man, he's not just a problem debtor. How dare you push such a person onto me?
Weren't you the one who stole him, Nancy? I retorted with a half-smile, and Nancy fell silent. Mike had incurred debts without even me knowing. Now, after the fact, several dunning letters have arrived. He must have hidden them while with me, but became careless after changing addresses. Or perhaps, typical of Mike, he got caught up in his new life and forgot to hide them.
Just figure it out yourselves,
I said and hung up. Eventually, Mike called, complaining about the high taxes for the car he took and not expecting the vehicle registration renewal fees to be so high, stating the obvious. Maintaining a car costs this much, huh? It's tough, so can't you take it back? I refuse. I curtly declined, and he hung up, seemingly dejected. After that, he reached out through messages asking for help, but I warned.
If you keep pestering me like this, I'll report you to the police for stalking.
And then he stopped coming altogether. What lies ahead for them is probably a hell much worse than hell itself. Later on, it seems Mike and Nancy got divorced. Their marriage lasted only 3 months after divorcing me. Their plans must have been thrown into disarray the moment it was clear that the single-family home, in my name, was not subject to division. Starting a marriage while burdened with debt and compensation payments was never going to work. Their divorce proceedings were apparently even more contentious than with me. Nancy is someone who clings to money.
Sell the new car. It's a waste to keep something like this. It'd be better to cash it in, right? I don't care about that money. Besides, I paid the compensation in full, so if we're divorcing, you need to pay me back.
They were stuck in such trivial arguments, unable to divorce for a while. Eventually, they did divorce, but Mike chose to file for bankruptcy. Since the compensation was paid in full and recovered, it didn't affect me. However, he ended up unemployed, devoid of assets, and ultimately fell into homelessness. He couldn't take back quitting his job and left the company. His useless pride prevented him from applying for TANF. Now, he's likely living a miserable life, doing something akin to begging. Divine retribution caught up with Nancy. After stealing my husband and cheating, her 3-month marriage became widely known, and her social relationships collapsed. Naturally, she was disowned by her family and relatives. No company would want to hire someone like her, so her job search continues to be difficult. She might get hired as a part-timer, but with a terrible attitude of blaming others and not herself, she's quickly fired. The lawyer's words that TANF is for you became a reality, and now Nancy is desperately trying to receive TANF. But because she continues to hold on to anything that might be worth money, she hasn't been able to receive TANF and was evicted from her apartment, ending up like Mike. Trampling not only on my feelings but also on Lisa's, such punishment is only natural. Now, it's just the two of us living, but our days haven't changed much. Mike, who never did anything for Lisa yet always complained, telling her to study or go to a good university, is gone, and Lisa says she feels refreshed. And impressively, she was accepted into a national university. Seeing Lisa about to become a college student this fall, I am once again moved. Work keeps me very busy in a good way, and though I'm nearly 46, I'm still in good health. I think to myself that I must keep working harder.
Violet, today's a family trip, okay? So we're going to have fun just with the family.
As I stood there, speechless, unable to respond to my husband Frank, my mother-in-law Chanel spoke up.
You really can't take a hint, can you? Stupidity must run in the family. Oh, how dreadful. What kind of upbringing did your mother provide you with? I really despise dealing with such stupid poor people. Did you actually think you could become part of our family? I've mentioned this before, haven't I? I'm not opposed to the idea of divorce. So, please go ahead and divorce Frank. It's a good thing you haven't had any children yet.
Upon hearing Chanel's words, I opened the envelope Frank had given me. Inside was a completed divorce application form. When we got married,
"Your smile is the best bouquet for me, Violet,"
Frank had said, slipping a silver ring onto my ring finger. I thought I could have a happy life with him. Chanel insulted my mother. She has no idea how my mother struggled to raise me and provide me with an education. My father-in-law Alex insulted my dad. He measured him by his own standards, unjustly judging his character. The Frank who used to send me bouquets on my birthday every year is gone. I've taken your love letters to heart. What day is today, Frank? You don't remember, do you? I didn't want to receive such a love letter on this day. But is that really what you think? Have you ever considered what you truly want? Either way, you've chosen your parents. That's all there is to it. Goodbye. Go to hell on that plane. I will never forgive you. I am Violet Miller, 35 years old. My parents divorced when I was in high school, and I've lived with my mom ever since. However, my mother passed away from an illness when I was 32. Then, 2 years ago, I happened to marry Frank, a year older than me. I met Frank while working a part-time job as a waitress at a nightclub. After losing my mother, I was in dire need of money. Despite my anxieties, I had no other choice but to dive into the nightlife. Frank was a customer there. Initially, he was brought along by an acquaintance, but eventually, he started coming by himself. Frank seemed to take a particular liking to me, visiting daily to see me.
Violet, you're the closest to my ideal woman I've ever met,
he would say, drinking expensive liquor. He was a generous customer, and I learned that his father owned a company, with Frank being the heir apparent. Frank, with his gentle and laid-back demeanor, was popular at the club. After receiving strong advances from him, I quit my job at the club and started dating Frank. A year after we met, we got married. During our courtship and early marriage, Frank always made sure to give me large bouquets on anniversaries. Not just on birthdays and wedding anniversaries, but also on the day we first met and our first date. Frank considered them all memorable occasions. Frank was somewhat elusive, but I loved his kindness and slightly pretentious side. When we got married, "Your smile is the best bouquet for me, Violet," he said, placing a silver ring on my finger. I thought I could have a happy life with him. But one day, I was faced with a shocking truth.
Violet, I guess you're my second favorite in the world,
Frank casually mentioned during dinner one evening. I had felt something was off since that morning, as Frank seemed unusually happy. Though it didn't seem to be for any special anniversary. Curious about his excitement, I asked, "Is something good happening?" And that was his response.
My favorites are Mom and Dad. They love me the most in the world.
It's not bad to cherish one's parents. In fact, I hoped he would. However, hearing a nearly 36-year-old Frank refer to them as Mom and Dad was a bit off-putting to me. Frank continued with an unabashedly happy smile.
Mom and Dad are going to live with us. You're happy about this, right? It's going to be fun from now on.
Reacting to Frank's words,
"What?"
I inadvertently exclaimed. In fact, Frank's parents had been opposed to our marriage. Alex is the president of a company passed down from the previous generation, and Frank has been promised the position of the next president. Alex and Chanel seemed displeased that the wife of the future president comes from a single-parent family. I thought they rejected me because I had worked in the nightlife district, but apparently that wasn't an issue for them. After all, Chanel herself had worked in the nightlife before Alex took a fancy to her and married her. When I met them once for a marriage introduction, I was flatly denied.
Marriage is a vow to devote your true heart to your partner for life. Divorce is out of the question.
After being told that, I was left speechless. So why, I wonder, have Frank's parents now decided to move in with us?
I don't really know, but maybe they've accepted us?
Frank says with a carefree laugh, but I'm filled with nothing but anxiety. I was never told about living together, nor did Frank consult me about it. If Frank's parents have accepted our marriage, that would be wonderful. But living together changes things. I believe we should gradually build a relationship with his parents, have discussions, and agree on living together. However, the words that came out of Frank's mouth were so shocking that they robbed me of all my words.
So, they're moving in tomorrow. Can you clean up the upstairs room, please?
Hearing that, I dropped the spoon I was holding and didn't even notice. The next evening, Frank's parents really did come to our house. I went to the entrance to greet them. Alex, Chanel, it's been a while. Please, make yourselves at home. I greeted them politely, but there was no response from Alex and Chanel. When I looked up, Alex and Chanel were already gone, apparently having hurried into the house. Rushing after them, I found a touching reunion taking place in the living room. Frank. I've missed you. Are you okay? Have you been eating properly? No one's been mean to you, have they? Wondering what they could mean by mean, I watched the parent-child reunion scene with a smile. Chanel was hugging Frank tightly. Frank seemed happy, patting Chanel on the back. I'm being fed, at least. But nothing beats Mom's cooking, right? You're making dinner today, aren't you? Frank was being as affectionate with Chanel as a child. Is this really how a nearly 40-year-old man should act, even if they haven't seen each other in a while?
Of course. Let's enjoy dinner as a family today.
Hearing this, Frank cheered, and Alex spoke up. Frank, it looks like the branch is doing well. I'm glad I left it to you. Alex runs the main company, and since Frank works at a branch, it seems they didn't see each other much.
Yeah, everything's going smoothly. I don't have to do anything. Everyone around me takes care of it all. I just have to look over the documents. Work is so easy.
I had never deliberately asked about Frank's work. Being the future president, I assumed he was handling his responsibilities commendably. But hearing their conversation made me suddenly anxious. Frank doesn't need to struggle. Leave the work to others, and you just enjoy your freedom. That's why we've surrounded you with competent people. Hearing Chanel's words, Frank nods obediently. Seeing this made me dizzy. Can a business really be run like this in today's world? Feeling a bit unsteady, I headed to the kitchen to make coffee. Then, could you not enter the kitchen without permission? Chanel told me, stopping me in my tracks. From today, that's my domain, so don't you dare enter without permission. And later, clean up all those tacky utensils you have there. Chanel said this without looking at me and then went back to conversing with Frank and Alex in the living room. I was so taken aback by the suddenness of it all that I just stood there, trying to process what was happening. Then Alex said, "Hey, how long is that outsider going to stand there? It's bothersome, so get lost." With that, he shooed me out of the living room like chasing away a dog. With my mind still not fully comprehending what had happened, I headed to my room. Finally managing to open the door and lock it, I just collapsed to the floor. Tears started to flow involuntarily. Frank, it's like they haven't accepted me at all. Can I really get along with Alex and Chanel from now on? With Frank acting the way he does, he'll definitely never stand up for me. I sat there, hugging my knees and crying. How much time has passed? Looking at the bedside clock, it was past 7 p.m. I left my room and quietly peeked into the living room. There, the three of them were enjoying a meal, seemingly prepared by Chanel. I couldn't tell what they were talking about, but they seemed to be having a good time. Just as I was about to sigh and return to my room, it happened. "Oh, Violet. Come here. We're going to be living together, so let's get along," Chanel said, surprising me. Her attitude was a complete turnaround from before. Alex also added, Chanel's cooking is really delicious. Please, have some. With kind words I couldn't believe came from the same person who had shooed me away like a dog. As I nervously approached the dining table where they were sitting, Chanel pulled out a chair for me to sit. Right, Violet, we were talking about going to Australia next month. Mom and Dad love Australia and often visit, but we haven't had our honeymoon yet, have we? We thought it might be a good idea to combine the two. The idea of a honeymoon was delightful, but the thought of going with Alex and Chanel was less appealing. However, if we're going to live together for a long time, maybe this trip could change our relationship. With hope, I decided to go on the trip to Australia. I've been thinking, and I realize that divorce can be unavoidable in some cases. After all, a husband and wife are ultimately strangers. I think your parents also had their reasons for their divorce. So, I'm not against divorce anymore, please be at ease. Chanel told me, and I felt a bit relieved. However, I couldn't help wondering why their attitudes had changed so drastically in just a few hours. Perhaps Frank had spoken to them. Even though he says his parents are the most important, he has always treated me with great care. Despite my lingering anxieties, I knew it was important to make an effort to meet them halfway. We're going to be sharing much of our lives together, so it's important to build a good relationship. I made up my mind to do just that. A month has passed, and today is the day of the trip to Australia. Honestly, I thought the arrival of Frank's parents marked the beginning of hell. Unexpectedly, I was accepted as a family member and have lived peacefully up to today. Alex and Chanel apparently hadn't sold their previous home and spent most of this month there. Perhaps not seeing Alex and Chanel often was why I was able to live peacefully. Frank would sometimes come home, but he started visiting his parents' house more frequently. Though I felt a bit lonely, I also enjoyed some freedom for the first time in a while. And today is the long-awaited family trip to Australia. Having not traveled with family since my mother passed away, I was genuinely looking forward to this day. I hope to deepen my relationship with Alex and Chanel on this trip and to be fully accepted as Frank's wife. Alex and Chanel and Frank were going to the airport directly from their house, so I took my luggage and headed to the airport myself. Since there's no airport in our town, I had to take a bus for several hours to a town that does. Even so, there's no direct flight to Australia, so I need to take a connecting flight domestically. It's quite a hassle, but the thought of an enjoyable trip makes it all worthwhile. Moreover, today is a special day for me. So, I believed this would indeed be a memorable trip. When I finally arrived at the airport, Alex and Chanel and Frank were already there, chatting happily. I ran up to them and said, "Good morning. You all are early." But no one responded, as if they hadn't heard me. As I tilted my head in confusion, Chanel turned to look at me. At the same time, "That doesn't matter. Give me Frank's passport," she said indifferently. I handed over Frank's passport, which I had brought from home, to Chanel. Chanel continued, "Traveling abroad is risky with cash, right? You didn't bring any, did you? If you did, I'll hold on to it for you. Hand over any cards to Frank." Not having much experience with overseas travel, I thought that was normal, so I handed over the cash I brought for emergencies to Chanel and all my credit cards to Frank. Then, Frank approached me and handed me an envelope. "Violet, this is a love letter from me. Thank you for everything." Frank was smiling at me. A love letter? What does thank you for everything mean? Though I had many questions, Frank and Chanel seemed oddly relieved. Alex, who had been silent until now, stood up from the bench he was sitting on. "All right, time to board."
At his words, Frank and Chanel started to move. I was completely lost.
Excuse me. I haven't checked in yet. Where's my plane ticket? As I said this, Frank, Alex, and Chanel turned around. Sighing, Alex and Chanel stepped aside, and Frank, still smiling broadly, said, "Violet, today's a family trip, so we're going to have fun just with the family." As I stood there speechless, Chanel spoke up. "You really can't take a hint, can you? Stupidity must run in the family. Oh, how dreadful. What kind of upbringing did your mother provide you with? I really despise dealing with such stupid poor people. Did you actually think you could become part of our family? I've mentioned this before, haven't I? I'm not opposed to the idea of divorce. So, please go ahead and divorce Frank. It's a good thing you haven't had any children yet." Opening the envelope Frank had given me, I found a completed divorce application form inside. "Violet, I'm going to marry this woman next. She's wealthy, and her parents are well off. After we return from Australia, I plan to meet her and start dating. She's closer to my ideal than you are. So, make sure you submit that love letter, okay?" Frank showed me a photo of a woman on his mobile phone screen. Indeed, she looked like Frank's type. No, that's not the point. It's unacceptable to declare marriage to another woman while still married to me. Violet, even if you try to sue, it's pointless. Frank hasn't done anything wrong now. What's wrong with a man choosing a woman strategically? I bet your father was a terrible man too. Probably committed adultery and that led to the divorce, right? Alex said this with a mocking laugh. I felt a surge of anger rising from the core of my being. Let's not waste any more time and go. Oh, by the way, the hotel we're staying at in Australia is from the famous Garcia Group in the US. They've just expanded into Australia and it's quite popular. I was worried we wouldn't get a reservation, but when I mentioned our company, Miller Corporation, they gladly accepted. They said we'd receive special treatment upon arrival. We're welcomed at luxury hotels because of who we are. Your presence lowers our standing. It's obvious, isn't it? Chanel said this and headed towards the boarding gate, pulling her carry-on behind her. Frank also waved at me as he passed through the boarding gate. That's when I realized something. I had handed over all my cash and cards to Chanel and Frank. I didn't have any money to get home. Noticing my dilemma, Alex said, "Violet, you might as well sleep on the streets." He left through the gate with those parting words. Knowing I couldn't do anything, I said, "Understood," and just stood there. The airport's announcements were audible. It seemed the plane carrying them to Australia had just taken off. I sat down on a nearby bench and absent-mindedly looked at the silver ring on my finger. Looking at the ring, various memories with Frank flashed through my mind. After some thought, I made a call. A few minutes later, after ending the call, I tried to calm my trembling heart filled with anger by taking deep breaths. I remembered Chanel's words. I've changed my mind about divorce. They must have been planning to divorce me from that moment. That's why she said her views on divorce had changed. And Chanel insulted my mother. She had no idea how my mother struggled to raise and educate me. Being from a single-parent family doesn't justify disdain. Alex insulted my father. He judged my dad by his own standards, deciding arbitrarily on his character. Though we didn't live together, my dad always cared for me. When times were tough, he secretly helped my mom out. No matter what anyone says, my dad is important to me. I won't tolerate insults against him. The Frank who used to send me bouquets on my birthday is gone. I've taken your love letter to heart. Frank, you don't remember what day it is, do you? I didn't want to receive such a love letter on this day. But is this really what you think? Have you ever considered what you truly want? Either way, you've chosen your parents. That's all there is to it. Goodbye. Go straight to hell on that plane. I will never forgive you. About a week after they left for their trip to Australia, my mobile phone rang. Seeing Frank displayed on the screen, I let out a deep sigh. Reluctantly, I pressed the answer button, thinking I'd listen to what he had to say one last time. Hello, if it's...
Hey you! Where are you right now?
Chanel's loud voice cut me off. Hearing the voice I least wanted to hear, I felt a surge of discomfort.
It doesn't matter where I am anymore, right? It's about time for you to return from Australia. Congratulations on your safe return, then.
I tried to end the call, but Chanel seemed to still have more to yell about.
Wait a minute. We're not done talking. Why aren't you at home? All your stuff is gone. You should be there to welcome Frank back.
Why would I be at home? Waiting for my husband to return? Confused by Chanel's words, I told her the facts.
That's no longer my home, and I no longer have a husband. It seems you've dialed the wrong number, so I'll be hanging up now.
Just as I was about to hang up, I heard Chanel's voice shout.
What's with this woman?
I thought to myself, that's exactly what I should be saying to you.
Violet. It's me, Frank. Something happened in Australia, and Mom's quite upset. Violet, aren't you coming back to our place?
I firmly said.
I won't be returning.
After all, it's no longer my home.
Frank, can you put the phone on speaker and tell me what happened in Australia?
Frank did what I said and turned his mobile phone into a speaker. Frank did as I asked, and I could hear Chanel complaining in the background. According to Frank, their stay in Australia went like this. A few hours after their flight, they landed safely in Australia. They proudly headed to a hotel managed by the Garcia Group. When they announced themselves at the check-in desk, the staff reacted and signaled something. Suddenly, people in the hotel's spacious lobby started dancing around Frank's family. Likely a flash mob. Frank, Alex, and Chanel, not understanding what was happening, assumed they were being welcomed. Guests around them clapped in rhythm to the music and dance. Confetti flew, and crackers were popped. The dancers struck a final pose. And then, the words that were,
"Happy birthday, Violet,"
released were. Naturally, Frank's family was taken aback. Among the applause from the surrounding guests, a beautiful hotel employee brought over a large cake on a wagon.
"Happy birthday." "Where's Violet?"
asked by the woman.
"I'm Violet,"
Chanel reluctantly said. But then, the woman loudly proclaimed, "But
Violet should be turning 36 this year."
In the lobby. This caused laughter among the guests and the flash mob alike. Clearly, it was a stretch for Chanel, who is turning 66, to pass for 36. Chanel's face turned red, and the Frank family quickly took the cake and retreated to their room.
"How dare you? Embarrassing me like this when you're not even here. You're unbelievable."
Frank and Alex had a hard time calming down an angry Chanel. In search of a change of scenery, they went shopping in the hotel shops, only to be greeted everywhere with,
"Where is Violet?"
The stress Chanel must have felt, being asked this at every shop, must have been significant. After being asked for the umpteenth time,
"Violet isn't here. She didn't come to Australia. Enough already."
Chanel burst out in anger. Then, a shop assistant said,
"Why isn't Violet here?" "Princess Violet is the star of today."
Hearing this, Chanel decided she had had enough of walking around the hotel that day. Hearing this story made me burst into laughter.
"What are you laughing at?" "Don't laugh.
What's this about Princess Violet? It's all your fault. I heard Chanel muttering something behind Frank, but I decided to ignore it for now. Yes, the Garcia Group hotels take their guests' birthdays very seriously. They have a concept of making the guest's special day memorable with special arrangements, which is popular among their customers. From the next day onwards, the "Where is Violet?" interrogations ceased, and they reportedly enjoyed a relatively fun Australian life. It seems there was a guest who recorded the entire sequence of events, including the flash mob dance. Chanel declaring herself as Violet was captured on film, and now, that short video is somewhat trending in America. That popular hotel accepted our reservation because of our company's name. It's proof that our company has grown and gained recognition. Be thankful for that. Chanel said this with a huff, and Alex, who hadn't said much until then, chimed in. After all, our company has significant investors. Seems like a businessman is personally investing. It's proof that our company's future is recognized. Alex, being the president, clearly took pride in his company. I wondered about Frank. Hey Frank, was the company okay while you were gone? Did you manage the handover properly? Frank seemed puzzled over the phone. What do you mean, handover? I didn't say anything to the company. I've never told anyone when I take time off or go back. I didn't tell anyone this time either. Hearing this, Alex asked in surprise. You didn't do a handover? Not even to the executives? Is everything okay? Haven't you received any calls from the company? Reminded by Alex, Frank said. Oh, I left my company mobile at home. Let me check. After checking his room, Frank exclaimed over the phone. What is this? It seems like the company called a lot. 500 missed calls. Suddenly, the phone became noisy, with apparent trouble brewing. Violet! It's an emergency. I'll call you back. With that, the call ended. I felt no sympathy for them, considering it was his responsibility. Weeks later, I had some business at Frank's house and decided to visit. When I rang the doorbell, Frank answered, even though it was the middle of a weekday. Oh, Violet. You've come back. Frank looked a bit haggard. No, that's not it. I came to return this, I said, handing over a small bag containing the silver ring. It was no longer needed by me, but too valuable to simply throw away, so I decided to return it to its original owner. Despite my lack of sympathy, I was curious about their current situation. Frank accepted the ring, his face a mix of emotions, looking almost like he was about to cry. I thought it was unfair for him to make such a face. If he was going to make that face, I wished he had stood by his decisions from the start. But such wishes were now empty. And nothing could change the fact that we were over. Then, the tearful Frank spoke. The company, everyone working there, they've quit. I had suspected some kind of trouble at the company, but didn't imagine that all the employees would leave. According to Frank, he had indeed left for Australia without arranging any handover. With no one to make important decisions in his absence, the company faced a crisis. No one could reach Frank by phone, causing inconvenience to multiple business partners. Exhausted by Frank's actions, the executives who had supported him decided to resign one after another. Feeling the company's situation turning dire, other employees also took the opportunity to resign. Effectively, the branch Frank was in charge of ceased to function. Urged by Frank, I entered the house. In the living room, a weary Chanel was sitting on the sofa. Alex was seemingly running around trying to manage the situation. Frank, deemed better off not moving, was on home standby. What are you doing here? You, a lowly poor person, wouldn't understand the troubles we have." Her rudeness was unchanged. I felt a slight urge to help, but Chanel's words quickly dispelled it. "Chanel, no souvenirs from Australia? Being left at the airport is pretty harsh, isn't it?" I said this with a smile, laced with sarcasm. Chanel glared at me. "How did you get back that day? You shouldn't have had any money." Ah, so taking my cash and cards was deliberate after all. Yes, I was in quite a bind. So, I called my dad. He told me to stay at one of his hotels nearby for the night. Frank and Chanel's eyes widened at my words. It seemed they didn't understand what I meant.
Luckily, there was a room available. It was my birthday that day, so I received the same flash mob celebration at the hotel you guys experienced. It was very touching."
Chanel's face turned red. The memories of that day must have been traumatic for her. Then, with her face still red, she asked me,
"The same celebration? Which hotel did you stay at?" "Surely not,"
I answered with a smile.
"Yes, the same Garcia Group Hotel. They have a wide network, and there was one near the airport."
Chanel seemed even more confused. She keeps asking me questions with wide eyes.
"Wait. Even we barely managed to book a room there. How could someone like you stay at such a hotel without a reservation?"
Before I could answer Chanel's question, a loud noise came from the entrance, and Alex entered the living room.
"It's terrible. Our main investor said they're pulling out. It's over."
Alex sat down, holding his head. Frank, realizing the gravity of the situation, looked panicked, his face pale. Chanel, who had been red-faced moments ago, now turned pale, looking despairingly at Alex. Just a few weeks ago, these same people who had looked down on me and laughed joyously were now in despair. Having lost everything. Yes, this is what I wanted to see. Those who disparaged my mother, insulted my father, betrayed and scorned me, now in despair and suffering.
My father was very happy when Frank and I got married. He wanted the prosperity of Frank and Alex's company, so he invested personally, considering you all as precious family. But you despised me for being from a single-parent family and ultimately betrayed me in the cruelest way. My father said there was no reason to invest in such people anymore."
With that, I left the house. I thought I heard their cries of anguish, but I didn't look back. I was no longer family to them. Perhaps we were never really a family from the beginning. I knew that the hotel we were supposed to stay at in Australia was managed by my real father. When a reservation request came in under the Miller name, my father made an effort to secure the booking. However, I didn't go to Australia. I didn't cancel the grand birthday welcome intentionally, to humiliate them. It was something I had asked my father to do. The reason my parents divorced was due to the common issue of drifting apart in their daily lives. My father, who had just started his company at that time, was incredibly busy every day. He now regrets that period deeply and cares a great deal about me. I also know how deeply saddened he was when my mother passed away. Even though we are apart, we are still a family. Frank, we are no longer a family, but I hope you will become more responsible and support your beloved parents. In the end, the only thing you can rely on is the bond of the heart that ties a family together. Later, I heard through the grapevine that Miller Corporation, Alex's company, had gone bankrupt. I think there was no future for that company the moment they considered making Frank the next president. One day, I saw someone who looked a lot like Frank at a construction site near my home. It was just for a moment, so I'm not sure if it was really him. Would Frank be sweating and doing physical labor? But part of me hopes it was him. I hope he becomes someone who can work hard to support his family. That's my final wish. Now, I'm training to become a staff member at the hotel managed by my father. It's a challenging job, but I take pride in doing something that brings smiles to people's faces. I've even learned the flash mob dance, looking forward to welcoming birthday guests to the hotel. Recently, I visited my mother's grave with my father. We prayed together and told her about recent events. Then, a strong wind blew, and we joked.
Maybe Mom is laughing now?
And we laughed together. Remembering this, my walkie-talkie crackles with a signal. It seems a birthday guest has checked in.
All right.
I brace myself and quickly head to the lobby, imagining the smiling faces of the guests waiting there.